I'm accidentally a roboticist. And by this, I don't mean that I'm some genius coder or programmer, or that I have a big, shiny industrial robot like a KUKA and can make it do things. I don't have any of that. I'm just a maker. I don't have a degree in robotics. I don't have a postgraduate qualification in robotics. I don't even have relevant industry experience. I don't even hang out with roboticists. I don't even go to the pub with roboticists. So why am I here shaking on a TED stage talking about robots? I ask myself this a lot. I mean, surely robots are these big, shiny, automated machines cunningly put together in a lab by people in white coats, right? And surely they've got nothing to do with people like me, with scruffy artists, with teenagers, with people just trying to get by. But honestly, robots are everywhere already. So when you get your car insurance on your phone at lunchtime, that's a robot doing that. That's machine-generated learning. And there's robot hoovers, there's robot lawnmowers. The problem we have is that the gap between what we perceive robots to be in science fiction and what robots actually are is really vast. And exploring that gap is actually really exciting. And I'm in that gap. I'm an artist making physical, touchable, tangible explorations into what robots can be, what robots can look like, and how we can make robots actually for everyone. And, I mean, a lot of people would say, well, robots are already for everyone. Anyone can buy a robot. It's great. But I don't think that's true. I think that only a tiny minority of people in this world actually design robots. And I think that's necessarily not a good thing. So that's what I do. I make robots out of scrap. So I get bits of cardboard, plastic, crochet, you name it, and I make robots out of it. And I do this with kids, and I do this with people who probably wouldn't think about making robots otherwise. And the reason I do it is because I think it's really important that we actually design our future together, that our future isn't just sold to us as a product. And I think there's not enough of these conversations currently happening. So I come from a traveller background, and by that I mean that all the way through my childhood, right up to my late 20s, I lived in some strange living situations. So I was in homeless hostels, I was in council houses, I was in squats, I was in really leaky teepees in Wales. They were not good, never had a teepee. I was in benders, I was in boats, I was in caravans, and I was in yards. But all that way through, I was outside of what you'd normally see as normal. And most of the people that I grew up with wouldn't have considered going to university. It wasn't really a thing, any of us did. But I really, really wanted to be an artist. So I had a go at it. And I scraped through, I slept on people's sofas. I used to sleep in a little cupboard called the rock and roll cupboard in a pub when I ran out of sofas. And it wasn't great, but it was okay. And then in my final year of university, my brother died. And that was awful. And that really put paid to higher education for me. I walked out of university at the end of that year and I was like, there is no way anyone is ever going to let me in these buildings ever again. It isn't going to happen. And I thought, whatever. And I got a 20-foot fiberglass boat and I turned it into a giant fish and I rowed it down the Thames. Because I know how to have a strop well, right? It was a nice fish. And eventually, I actually got a proper job, a very unlikely one. I started teaching art in a young offenders institution in Reading, Oscar Wilde's actual jail. And that's what really turned me, because working in there with the young people I was working with, I realized I had a lot more in common with them than I did with anybody I'd ever gone to university with. Because when in the whole of your life you feel like there's no options, where your real options are like stacking shelves down Tesco's or selling drugs, and there doesn't feel like there's any other routes out, where there's no support networks, and you just feel like the odds are stacked against you, you feel like your life is already circumscribed, that you haven't got a safe way out. And I really wanted to see and show people that there were other ways out. There's fish boats on the Thames, there's sofas, there's other options. So for the last 15 years, I've been working with people who feel for one reason or another like they're other, like they're outside, who maybe have felt like they're bad because of this in the way that I did growing up. And it's been great. And alongside this, I've been an artist. Not a normal artist, because I'm Gypsy Roma Traveller and we always do things the weird way around. For me, my way of being an artist was to build massive things at festivals, like this. Huge, stupid things. Festivals are a really good place to make art because they'll let you make things that are absolutely ginormous. And the remit's really simple, right? It's got to be cheap. It's got to be easy to get up. It's got to be easy to take down, and this was neither. And no one's allowed to die. So that taught me some basic engineering skills, which was really helpful. But the other thing it taught me, which was quite interesting, especially when you work with scrap, is that touring large things made out of scrap around the country taught me a really simple thing, which is that people get really excited by the use of materials taken out of context. For example, this is 24 washing machines. And teenagers would climb into it and be like, oh, I can see a bit of my washing machine there. And it made them feel like they had a connection to the work. And this is a giant Grace Jones head, which is made out of old scaffold that we've cut and welded back together. And the great thing about stuff like this, and I'm going to have to take this from my notes because otherwise I never get it right, because you're using recognizable objects, people can see the journey and picture themselves doing it. By making non-perfect objects, you give other people the roadmap to get there and support them to feel creative themselves. Like the gap between artists and people is a lot smaller. So, this is a weird robot. In 2019, I saw this fellowship with the Southwest Creative Technology Network, which was a research project run between UWE Bristol, Bath Spa, Falmouth, Plymouth. And basically, the fellowship was money to just spend time on something, but it had to be related to automation. And I was like, yes, mate, I can make things that talk back to me. I'm so excited. And I started working with a brilliant programmer called Joseph Wilk. That's his hand over there. And we were interested in making simple robotic interfaces that couldn't maim you. Because most robots, industrial robots, they kill you, right? They keep them in cages in the robot lab. And we wanted to do stuff that wasn't in cages. And we learned two really interesting things really early on. One of them is that you can literally make robots out of anything. And the other one is that there's a really interesting correlation between understanding robotics and considering the impact of artificial intelligence on the Earth. Because you're thinking about the same problems, essentially. So we started making small reactive interfaces like this. So this is powered by a thing called a LiDAR detector. And the LiDAR can tell where you are and react to you, which means that you can make stuff that feels like it's alive, that's quite humane. And we wanted to do that because we wanted to explore this issue around sentience. We all like to make robots feel human, right? It's interesting. The great thing about making robots out of scrap, if you make robots out of anything, we can allow ourselves to start really complex conversations about what robots should be and should not be, and what robots should do and should not do, because that's scary, right? By making robots out of anything, with anyone, we can have these really interesting conversations about how we make robotics for everyone. Because if you get involved and you start actually physically putting together and making a robot, you start considering what you'd want it to do. And then you start considering what it could do and what it couldn't do. And those conversations are really meaningful and really exciting. AI is the ultimate otherness. And we need to start having conversations with young people now about what this otherness looks like, especially young people who've experienced otherness, who understand that sense of being other. Because if we don't, we'll be bringing in all the problems of the past and sending them into the future. The other reason I make robots out of scrap is because These like plastic shiny white robots you see on the telly, they're not particularly environmentally friendly. They're detrimental to our environment. And I think that new technologies and carbon zero seriously need to sit together in the future, right? Because otherwise, we're not going to have a shiny, perfect future. So in May 2021, we had a pandemic, right? So we couldn't put our robots up in the way that we were expecting to, but instead we hosted them in an empty shop on the high street in Bath, and we invited people in to come and look around and to build robots. And it was really brilliant, because we had people who would normally probably never come and look at a robot or be interested in building a robot, and they'd come in, and we'd have these big, world-spanning conversations, these huge conversations about the future of the world and what we wanted it to look like. Probably that you wouldn't find outside of the sci-fi convention. And it was fabulous. It taught us a lot. So now we build robots out of scrap on the high street. And we do this with people who would probably not normally experience robotics. And it's working. And it's working because we're teaching new skills. We're showing new routes out. I mean, coding is better money and a lot less risky than selling drugs, let's be fair. And we're able to empower people because we're together with people having these big conversations about our future. And most of all, it's just really fun. Robots are fun. And you can't have big conversations about robots and try and change the world without that element of fun. You need the fun to feed the creativity and the optimism that actually engenders change. And that's me, and that's my robots.